The proceedings are resumed. Prayers to be read by the Honorable Minister of Financial Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning, colleagues. Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundation for the glory of thy name and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the Governor of our islands, the Premier, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the Leader of the Opposition, Ministers of Cabinet, ex officio members, and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace, now and always. Amen.
Please be seated.
Administration of oaths or affirmations.
None.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker of messages and announcements.
None. Apologies I have received for today. Bernie Bush, the member for West Bay North, and for Mr. Saunders, member for Bordentown West.
Presentation of petitions.
None.
Presentation of papers and of reports. 2013-2014 Supplementary Annual Plan and Estimates for the year ending 30th of June 2014, and for the year ending 30th of June 2015, and for the year ending 30th of June 2016, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of Government, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House supplementary annual plan and estimate documents for the Government of the Cayman Islands with respect to the financial years ended 30th of June 2014 through 30th of June 2016.
So ordered. Does the Honourable Minister wish to speak thereto?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Could I just inquire on you? You're laying the report. He can speak to them. You're speaking to and the laying of the report to all three one time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In accordance with Standing Order 67-1, the three supplemental annual plan and estimates documents that have been tabled stand referred to the Finance Committee. As the estimates will be considered in Finance Committee at the conclusion of the second reading of the associated supplementary appropriation bill, I wish to make only very brief remarks with respect to the documents that have now been tabled. Mr. Speaker, the supplementary annual plan and estimates that have just been tabled are all structured in the same way. Part A of the documents contains changes to the appropriations law for a specific financial year. Part A also shows, with respect to the specific appropriations being changed, the following information: the amount of original approved appropriation for a particular budget item, the amount of the supplementary appropriation proposed for the particular budget item, and the revised appropriation amount for that particular budget item. Part B of the documents show the amount of the supplementary appropriations for particular items in the appropriation law for that particular financial year. Details in Part B of the documents correspond to the schedule to the supplementary appropriation bill for the particular financial year concerned. It is also important to note that whilst the word supplementary is used frequently in the documents, changes to appropriations do not only involve expenditure increases, but the documents will also clearly demonstrate that there are reductions into expenditures as well. Part C of the documents shows the financial statements for the financial year. Mr. Speaker, the supplementary annual plan and estimates documents tabled today represent expenditure changes for which the government seeks the Legislative Assembly's approval. Mr. Speaker, honourable members, except perhaps for those of our first-time MLAs, will recall that shortly after taking office in 2003, the then government brought supplementary appropriation bills that tidied up supplementary expenditures that were incurred by the two previous governments during the four-year period from May 2009 to May 2013. The process to obtain approval from the Legislative Assembly for supplementary expenditures incurred during the four-year period with respect to the financial years ended 30th of June 2010 through 30th of June 2013 was carried out in September of 2013. Mr. Speaker, the practice of a current government bringing supplementary appropriation bills to the Legislative Assembly at the start of its term with respect to supplementary expenditure matters incurred by a previous government is a practice that should be discouraged because it does not represent good fiscal management and accountability. Mr. Speaker, except for our first-time MLAs, honourable members will recall that the documents just tabled and their associated supplementary appropriation bills were brought to the House in March 2017, and the bills all received their second readings and were set to be considered afterwards by Finance Committee. Unfortunately, the House was dissolved in late March 2017, as it was required to do prior to the 2017 general elections. The documents and bills were not considered by Finance Committee, and this entire process has had to be restarted. And this explains why some members will recall seeing this information and these documents before. Accordingly, government is now bringing supplementary appropriation annual plan and estimates documents and supplementary appropriation bills to the Legislative Assembly at the first possible opportunity during its current meeting. This change represents an improvement to past practice and has not been said to boast, but rather is being said because it represents better fiscal management and accountability, which we are striving for. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions to honourable ministers and members of the cabinet?
Before you take that item, we have now reached the hour of 11 a.m. Is there a motion to suspend standing orders 23, 7, and 8? Honorable Premier, suspension of standing order 23, 7, and 8.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the suspension of standing orders 23, 7, and 8 in order that question time may commence and continue beyond the hour of 11 o'clock.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Madam Clerk.
The elected member for East End to ask Honourable Premier, Minister of Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs. Question number 7.
The elected member for East End.
Question number 7, standing and my name is asked of the Premier. Can the Honourable Minister state what measures are being taken by the Utility Regulation and Competition Office, OFREG, and or the Information Communication Technology Authority, ICTA, to ensure information communication technology providers are compliant with the requirements of their license? B, how are complaints from the consumers of ICT networks dealt with by OFREG and ICTA?
Honorable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, to adequately answer this question, some background is necessary on the Utility Regulation and Competition Office, also known as OFREG. OFREG, having been established pursuant to the Utility Regulation and Competition Law, came into effect on January 16th this year. As a consequence, the ICTA and ERA ceased to exist. In effect, the office subsumed the laws, regulations, rules, and policies of the ICTA and continues to manage compliance and complaints as the ICTA did previously. OFREG was established primarily to regulate the utilities sector, including ICT, energy, fuels, and water. Responsibility for actual sector policy is managed by 2 separate ministries. The Ministry of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure is responsible for policy related to ICT, fuels, and energy, including electricity and renewable energy. And the Ministry of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture, and Lands is responsible for water policy. It should be noted that policy-related correspondence between ministries and OFREG is set up to occur between respective chief officers and the CEO of the office. OFREG reports to the Cabinet Office on administrative matters, relations with Cabinet, its budget, etc. As the office continues to establish itself, it will continue to evaluate the effectiveness of its compliance framework and make amendments where necessary. The general provisions within the URC law impose powers, rights, and obligations on OFREG. The ICT Law 2016 has main headings setting out powers or obligations standards serving to ensure compliance with the national needs that the ICT regulator serves to uphold. Compliance generally relates to operation policy and or technical aspects of a licensee as appropriately regulated by OFREG. Essentially, the URC law and the ICT law prescribe the legal framework dictating OFREG's enforcement powers. OFREG relies on its sector monitoring activities, complaints received from licensees about other licensees, consumer complaints, and its own analysis of reports that licensees are required to provide on a periodic basis and on demand to assess compliance of licensees with their licenses. The nature and scale and scope of any instances of non-compliance identified will determine the enforcement measure taken by OFREG. The second part of the question, Mr. Speaker, Section 9 of the ICT law provides the OFREG with powers to, quote, to investigate and resolve complaints from consumers and service providers concerning the provision of ICT services and ICT networks. Pardon me. The process which addresses this provision is split between service providers' complaints and the .ky domain namespace complaints. Regarding consumer complaints about service providers, the office requires that all operators establish a complaints process and make that process available to all consumers. However, where a consumer tried to resolve the matter with the operator and is not satisfied, the consumer may complain directly to OFREG in writing by filling out an online form or submitting a letter or email. The complaints process can be found on OFREG's ICT sector webpage, http www.icta.ofreg.ky/how to make a complaint. Naturally, the office accommodates individuals unable to submit complaints in writing, but the written version is preferred because of the record it provides. OFREG goes through an internal process, including interrogatories to the licensee involved, to investigate and resolve the complaint.
Member from East End.
Thank you. I wonder if the minister can tell us if there has been any move towards build out to ensure that ICT networks are compliant with build out to have proper services throughout the Eastern Districts.
Honorable Premier.
Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the answer is yes, there is active engagement by OFREG with respect to trying to resolve some of these disputes about the pole attachment disputes, which are a key factor in inhibiting the growth or the spread of fiber into the other districts. And there is also ongoing discussions about concerns for the need for more offshore connectivity on the sea cables and so forth. And the office is in the process of doing an assessment with respect to that.
Are there any other supplementaries? The member from East End.
Uh, Miss, I wonder if the minister can tell us if there is any resolution in sight. And I'm not only talking about telephoning, I'm talking also about television and those who were in the internet service, period.
Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could I ask the member if he could be a bit more specific with respect to his question about is there any resolution inside with respect to what specifically?
Elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure all of us have received complaints from our constituents, and in particular the Eastern End, on delivery of service from TV, internet service. All of these things combined, I would like to know if these things are monitored, watched over, and where the complaints are coming from, really. And if there's any resolution in sight to try and get these people to build out their system to make sure what they're advertising is received. That is, I guess, our largest complaint throughout the country.
The Premier?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, my apologies, but this is a technical area which is not necessarily my forte, so I need briefing. Mr. Speaker, the answer is yes. There are active measures on the way to seek to resolve and to improve the quality and choice of service within the Eastern Districts. Part of it I referred to before, which is efforts on the way to try to resolve these disputes about pole attachment, which continue to be a major inhibitor of the ability of other providers to provide the service, and to address other disputes relating to duct sharing, misleading advertising. There's an ongoing revenue reporting audit. There have OFREG has put in place outage reporting rules so that they have to report when they have these outages, so that the necessary measures can be taken by the regulator, engaging with third-party bandwidth monitoring agency to install bandwidth bots locally, the creation of ISP regulations, that is Internet Service Provider regulations, which deal with minimum speeds per contract, contract terms, quality of services, etc. The development of consumer protection regulations, and a cyber security strategy, which is currently under development. Mr. Speaker, the three big issues that the office of REG is seeking to promote and to push are issues of choice, and the member spoke about some of these: voice, which that is fixed and mobile voice, internet service and TV, and quality of service and encouraging innovation. It continues to be a major challenge, particularly the disputes that still rage between the service providers, and particularly this issue of sharing with respect to the poles, which is a key factor in making the provision of these services more generally available and higher quality.
The elected member for Northside.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Premier could state whether there are provisions in the license to cancel these licenses if they have not met their build-out projections that they have put forward, because some of this has been going on over 10 years. If so, why have they not been cancelled?
Honorable Premier.
So, yes, Mr. Speaker, the answer is yes, there are provisions in the licenses which allow, in appropriate cases, for suspension of the license or ultimately cancellation of the license. But my remark made earlier, although appearing to be in jest, is absolutely right. If we suspend the services, if we cancel the licenses, then it is the consumer who is going to suffer as much, if not more, than the actual service provider. So it is a balancing exercise which OFREG has to carry out in the years immediately following liberalization. this has been really free for all in terms of the way the service providers operated. They were motivated principally by commercial considerations. Now, in more recent times, with greater efforts at regulation, it is the job of OFREG to try to balance those considerations, ensuring that the service provider continues to be motivated by the profit potential, but at the same time that they do not falsely advertise services that they can't provide, and that the interests of the consumer are met. We are a long ways from achieving the ideal situation, but I do hope that what we've been able to explain today indicates that offering a new entity is really pressing forward with alacrity to try to resolve some of these long-standing issues.
Thank you. The elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I support the Premier in that
This will be the last supplement on this question.
I support the Premier in that we can't just remove the license, or in many instances, it doesn't make sense to suspend it because they're still operating because of how their networks are designed. However, that has been the problem that we have experienced for the last 12 years, I would say. We didn't have proper mechanisms in place to monitor and to force them into getting these things done, such as build out. So, the last administration said the law did not have sufficient teeth. Thus, no enforcement could be done. We here changed the law to have administrative fines up to $500,000. Now, coupled with that, and the amount of complaints and the lack of compliance on their part too, and their poor...
Are you forming the question? The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister responsible for OFREG explain what are the penalties for those who are found to be violating by way of not offering what they advertise? Thank you.
Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With respect to the measures that are available, starting at the lowest end, there is there's ability to issue a recommendation to the provider to do something or other, a directive, a fine, suspension, and ultimately cancellation of the license.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was actually trying to establish the amount of the potential fines, and the reason I asked the question is because the Premier has acknowledged the difficulty for the office when these violations happen, because they don't want to just turn off the service. So we must make sure that the amount in fines are strong enough to stop those who would violate on behalf of the customer.
Premier,
Mr. Speaker, the maximum fine possible is 500,000.
shall we move on?
The elected member for Newlands to ask the Honourable Minister of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing, question number 8.
Elected member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask question number 8 in my name to the Honorable Minister of Health. Can the Honorable Minister state what, if anything, is being done to address the ongoing supply issues with critical medications at the Health Services Authority, pharmacy, including but not limited to antibiotics?
The Honorable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the management of pharmacy stores at the Health Services Authority changed more than 2 years ago, and the authority has considerably increased the resources allocated to managing medication purchases. Since then, the authority has made major changes in eliminating shortages of regularly demanded medication, ad hoc medication purchases for specialty use, which are not part of the tendered contracts, can be challenging to source from time to time. The pharmacy stores team works tirelessly behind the scenes to resolve these ad hoc shortages. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Elected member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could the minister give some indication of what he means when he says ad hoc medication?
Honorable Minister of Health.
Means ad hoc.
The elected member for Newlands.
I'll be more specific then. Does ad hoc include medications such as antibiotics, antihistamines, cough medicine, and medications generally prescribed for the flu and cold?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think yeah, it's it's ad hoc shortages and not ad hoc medication. And Mr. Speaker, there's no shortages of medication.
Elected member for Newlands.
Maybe I'm not reading, thank you, Mr. Speaker, maybe I'm not reading this answer correctly or clearly or something, but ad hoc medication purchases for specialty use. I take that to mean it's not your just regular medication that you would find in a pharmacy, but special medication. For example, it might be something to do with cancer treatment and so forth. What I'm referring to are shortages of medications that are prescribed on a regular basis, daily basis, such as antibiotics, which I know for a fact, because I've taken my child to the hospital at least 4 times and been told there's no antibiotics. So I know for a fact there have been shortages. I'm not relying on anyone else for this source, for this information. However, I am being told by constituents that they have the same problem. So that's where I'm going with this question, if that clears it up.
The Honorable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been reliably informed that there's no shortages. However, for the Minister of Newland's comfort, I will undertake to seek further information, possibly even as early as today, to share with this honorable House.
Elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I realize that we've only been in Parliament 3 months, so maybe the lack in timing of when those shortages that we are discussing happened could be the reason for confusion. There could potentially haven't been a shortage since the minister took office, but 3 weeks ago. Okay. If in fact there were any shortages, would those shortages be in connection in any way to a lack of payment to the providers of the medications?
Honorable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Member from Georgetown Central, as stated earlier, I will undertake to get further information on this subject matter. Thank you for your patience.
The elected member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to give the minister a parting word of advice. This question has come up before in this honorable House, and we received the same answer that you just gave, and nothing has changed. So it's not really me that you need to worry about. It's the people who rely on the health services for medications, including elderly people who need to get medication in a timely manner. So I'm not trying to embarrass the minister or make him feel as if he's not doing his job. I just want these issues to be resolved because I get the complaints, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Minister of Health.
I appreciate the minister's, the member from Newland's concern. I have the same concern. So definitely, in hearing his sage words that these comments have been mentioned in this honorable House before, I definitely will take special interest in ensuring that you're provided with accurate information. And if I'm not satisfied, as this is something that affects every resident of the Cayman Islands, I will undertake to ensure that it's rectified.
The elected member for Georgetown Central. This is the last supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This would have been my last question anyway. And forgive me if I'm not familiar with the parameters of the questioning, but I assume that my next question is within the parameters of what we're discussing. In the strategic policy statement delivered by the Honorable Premier, they highlighted some measures in cost reduction medication, and I highlighted one line that said, in terms of procurement, work has already begun to reduce the cost with the use of a reverse auction system to purchase pharmaceuticals and medical supplies. Now, I take that as a new strategy to be able to get prices of medication a lot cheaper for a simple man's terms. I just want to make sure that I am clear that that is the case, and if so, possibly can the minister elaborate how, so the general public can understand that the minister is working hard to reduce the cost of medicines for Caymanians.
Honorable Minister of Health. Just to say to members, whenever you're quoting from the SPS, since we have several questions and I don't know where members will be asking, please quote the pages that you're quoting from. Elected member for Georgetown Central, can you quote the page for the Honorable Minister?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The page is on page 21 of the statement delivered by the Honorable Premier. I apologize, Mr. Speaker, on page 20, the very first paragraph, the fourth line down. And Mr. Speaker, for clarity, there is obviously two strategic policy statements, one delivered by the Honorable Minister for Finance and one delivered by the Honorable Premier. And the one I quoted from was from the Honorable Premier.
The motion. Honorable Minister.
I can only thank the member from Georgetown Central for his kind comments. And the reverse process has actually saved us millions of dollars that has just been introduced to me. And I will undertake to share more information on how that actual process works. Reverse auction. Sorry.
The elected member for Newlands to ask the Honourable Minister of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture and Lands. Question number 9.
The Honorable elected member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask question number 9, standing in my name, to the Minister of Sports. Can the Honourable Minister A state how is the government ensuring that sports organizations are operating according to the standards and expectations of the Minister of Sports in particular those organizations who receive grants from the government, and B, provide a list of all sports organizations who currently receive financial support from the government, as well as amount details of the sums given, and state what objectives and deliverables these organizations are expected to meet.
The Honorable Minister of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture and Lands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The answer. Sports organizations are now included under the definition of the recently commenced Non-Profit Organization Law 2017. The new legislation requires that all non-profit organizations to complete a one-time registration process with the Register of Non-Profit Organizations, which have been designated as the Registrar General, that is the General Registry. The registration will include information on the name, purpose, and activities of the non-profit organization, as well as the verification of the persons who own, control, operate, and manage these entities. Additionally, when registered, non-profit organizations are required to file annual returns, which detail the business conducted by the non-profit organization for the preceding financial year. Furthermore, non-profit organizations are required to notify the registrar of the non-profit organizations within 30 days of any change that are made to the non-profit organization. The Non-Profit Organizations Law 2017 also requires non-profit organizations to maintain financial records that prove the financial position of the organization for a minimum of 5 years, and requires non-profit organizations to have appropriate internal controls that mitigate the risk of terrorist financing. It is also important to note, Mr. Speaker, that internal controls mitigate the risk of terrorist financing. They also mitigate the risk of theft, defalcation, money laundering, and other untoward activities. The Register of Nonprofit Organization is responsible for ensuring that the nonprofit organizations have appropriate internal controls, as well as ensuring that appropriate financial records are maintained. The Register of Nonprofit Organization will ensure that these requirements are being met through a supervisory regime that includes on-site inspections and off-site supervision. Lastly, the new Nonprofit Organization Law 2017 provides the registrar with powers to institute an investigation into nonprofit organization, as well as to impose administrative penalties on nonprofit organizations that fail to comply with the legislation, and further cancel or suspend the registration of a nonprofit organization that fails to comply with the requisite legislation. Sports organizations are funded through purchase agreements approved by the Legislative Assembly. Funds are dispersed to these organizations based on the said purchase agreement. The dispersal is made following the submission of the reports of their activities and an accompanying invoice. The periodic reports by these national sports organizations follow the reporting policy and guidelines put into use starting in 2015 to the 2016 financial year. They seek to get a comprehensive understanding of the various component activities that comprise the overall development of the particular sport. These reports require the submission of general information about the association and more specific information, such as the membership of the executive, staffing levels, and coaching levels of the staff. The reports also contain sporting activities of the association broken down in 3 age categories: primary age, secondary age, and those over the age of 17. Associations are asked to further break down their programs into 4 groups, that is fitness, recreational, developmental, school, and high performance. Additional details on any activities executed in relation to 1, coaching development, 2, officials development, 3, volunteer development, 4, events, fundraising, camps, meets, introductory sessions, award events, etc., and 5, national competitions. The reporting policy and guidelines also require, on an annual basis, the submission of financial statements based on the level of funding granted to the various organizations as follows. For those granted less than, say, $20,000 per annum, audited financial statements must be submitted where available. Where audited financial statements are not available, management accounts, for example, trial balance, profits and loss statement, and cash flow, which have been prepared and signed by the entity's treasurer and president and their chairman. For those granted more than $20,000 but less than $50,000, audited financial statements must also be submitted where available. Where audited financial statements are not available, management accounts must be submitted. These have been reviewed and signed by an independent licensed accountant from outside the entity. For those granted more than $50,000, audited financial statements must be submitted for the organization's last financial year. In February this year, a child abuse prevention policy for National Sports Association was instituted. Each association was required to sign on the said policy. All national associations have now signed on to the policy. The ministry has provided a series of training sessions to train officials of the National Association in child abuse matters. Another series will run in September 2017. Answer 2. Organizations receiving funding in 2017 to 2016 are as follows, Mr. Speaker. 1. The CIA Amateur Swimming Associations, 107, 587.50. The CIA Athletic Association, 135, 262.50. CIA Basketball Association, 107, 587.50. Cayman Cricket, 107, 587.50. CIA Cycling Association, 5,000. CIA Darts Association, 6,175. CIA Equestrian Federation, 3,000. CIA Marathon Kelly Holden, 14,000. CIA National Squash Association, 14,000. CIA Netball Association, 107, 587.50. CIA Olympic Committee, 104, 125. Rugby, Football Union, 75,263. CIA Sailing Club, 56,288. CIA Volleyball Federation, 35,000. Special Olympics Cayman Islands, 10,000. Sports Association Sister Islands, 24,000. CIA Boxing Association, $145,987.50. NGS 82 other sports programs. Academy Sports Club, 12,065. Bordentown Football Club, 24,130. Cayman Athletic Sports Club, 12,065. Elite Sports Club, 24,130. FC International Football Club, 8,550. Flowers Sea Swim, 10,000. Futures Sports Club, 12,065. K-Star Athletics, 30,000. Prison Welfare Fund Cricket Club, 4,275. The associations and clubs assisted are expected to meet the deliverables as outlined in the purchase agreements and confirmed in the reports as outlined. Currently in progress, national sports associations are governed by their respective international governing bodies of sport, which have standards that they must adhere to. For those that are Olympic sports, they're also required to be members of the Cayman Islands Olympic Committee. The ministry recognizes that care must be taken to avoid interfering with the operations of local government bodies of sport as per international sporting protocols. But in light of recent policy additions and legislative changes, the ministry will be proposing several additional requirements for sporting organizations receiving funding as follows. For national sports associations, 1, a certificate of good standing from the Cayman Islands Register of Companies. 2, confirmation of good standing from the relevant international government body of sport. 3, a list of current directors certified by the Register of Companies and confirmation of the executive members and their various roles. 4, confirmation of good standing from the Cayman Islands Olympic Committee for Olympic sports. 5, the provision of relevant management accounts for the organization as per the reporting policy for national sports associations. 6, reports on activities to achieve the requirements of the child abuse prevention policy. For sports clubs, 1, certificate of good standing from Cayman Islands Register of Companies. 2, confirmation of good standing from the relevant local government body of that particular sport. 3, a list of the current directors certified by the Register of Companies and a confirmation of the executive committees in their various roles. 4, the provision of the relevant management accounts for the organization as per the reporting policy for national sports associations, provision of reports of the club activities in relation to child abuse prevention policy. Transfer payments. Through a transfer payment grant process, the government also assists with the funding of sports proposals that were not specifically budgeted through the purchase agreements. There are several categories, Mr. Speaker, through which these funds are granted. 1, partial sports for scholarships for high school students. 2, sponsorship of locally hosted international events. 3, sponsorship of locally hosted sports events. 4, support for locally hosted sports camps. 5, support for locally held youth camps. 6, support for athlete development. 7, other youth or sport development grant for requests for sports other than those categories rise above. 8, support of training for and of travel to international tournaments. And 9, partial sports scholarship for collegiate students. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Are there any supplementaries? The elected member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for that very thorough answer. And Mr. Speaker, I will cut straight to the crux of the issue here, because I'm sure the Minister is aware the Cayman Islands Boxing Association has run into some difficulty in that the legal entity has been struck from the register now for, I think, over 10 years. And the organization is now in sort of in limbo because they are no longer recognized by AIBA, which is the international boxing, amateur boxing body. And I'm now hearing of concerns that, coaches are not being paid. Apparently the former president of the association has canceled the work permit for the head coach without him knowing. And the boxers are now in a state of uncertainty. And I wanted to bring this issue to the floor of this Honorable House because I'm very concerned. There are a number of young athletes who are depending on the association to help them move forward with their careers, move forward into becoming professionals and so forth. And I'm asking what is being done to remedy all of this as quickly as possible. I understand that there may be some legal concerns and so forth, but at present, the situation is not good. Well, just to add to that, Mr. Speaker, I understand that a new entity has been formed and a new board has been elected, and that entity is now asking for recognition as the Cayman Islands Boxing Association and is now working to get recognition from AIBA. And in my mind, the way forward is to obviously try to get that entity working and moving and funded and so forth. So I'm trying to find out what the plans are. 1, to remedy the situation with the old entity, and 2, to recognize the new entity going forward.
Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm reliably informed that they have been paid funds due under this grant from the ministry up until the end of June, and the ministry has refused to release any further funds until they get the act in order. But I am happy to report that it is not a stagnant position, but in fact that they are vigorously ensuing to reestablish themselves. They have formed a new corporate company, which is now legal. That's my instructions. And they're also seeking to get on par with the international standards. Because they are a private company, it is not the business of the minister to get into the HR responsibilities, but we deal with the financial aspects. And if we feel that the sport is not delivering the achievables that have been set out in the purchase agreement, then the ministry will take a more hands-on approach. We intend to meet with all associations, including the Boxing Association, and I'm happy to say that the ministry is very, very much equipped with an excellent team of sports persons advising me. And I'm also happy to report that based on my background in sports, it will take a pretty good person not to give me accurate information. I thank you.
The elected member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just one other small matter which I was reluctant to raise, but I'm going to raise it just because we're in a public setting and I want it clarified, because apparently I have been accused of interfering in this process of apparently getting rid of the old president and getting a new president installed. If you let me finish, you'll understand whether or not it's true. But just to clarify, I don't know if your ministry has received any...
Are you asking a question?
Yes, I'm about to ask the question.
You coming to the question?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Has the ministry received any form of complaint about me interfering in the process or being involved in any of this?
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as of the current position, the ministry is not in receipt of any complaints or statement of facts that the honorable member from Newlands is guilty of, and I'm happy to hear first-hand testimony that he is not so guilty.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to say thank you so much to the Honorable Minister for such a detailed response. I learned a lot in that short period of time. But I did notice that in the outline of the different sporting associations that were listed, many of, or three of ones that are concerned for me, particularly because they came up in the campaign as well, were not listed here. I'm not saying that they're not being assisted, but I just want some clarification, that being particularly water sports with the jet skis and wave runners. Secondly, the Bikers Association, and the cars and sporting, because these three areas are also sports, but I saw that there was no allocations for them, not suggesting that they weren't, but maybe the minister can indicate to me that the government is or have assisted them in before or are listed as sporting activities in the Cayman Islands.
Honorable Minister of Sports.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I'm reliably informed that the water sports have been assisted. They ebb and flow. Sometimes assistance is not requested, but when it has been, they've been assisted. The motor sports is being assisted this year through our capital vote, which you'll see in the budget coming up to quite a substantial aggregate amount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that leads me to my follow-up question, which will be my last one. The former Minister for Sports, the Honorable Osborne Borden, made the statement that the former administration, if re-elected, would secure proper facilities for motor vehicles, whether that be motorcycles or cars, in this administration. I want, if the minister can indicate that that promise is being fulfilled, because there's a large amount of young people who take up that activity that keeps them away from other negatives, and I would like to know if the minister can say that it is following through.
Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues from Georgetown, led ably by the Honorable Premier, did insist that a significant sum is placed in the upcoming estimates, and we look forward to support of all members to make this a realization in East End for this up-and-coming popular sport.
Shall we move on? Next question.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, elected member for Northside, to ask the Honourable Minister of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing, question number 10.
Elected member for Northside.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I wish to ask the Honourable Minister for Health, can the Honourable Minister say how many Caymanians are currently studying medicine and their projected date of completion, and if these scholarships include board certification as specialists?
Honorable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the honourable member from Northside for that question. Mr. Speaker, the database at the Health Services Authority reflects reflects 13 postgraduate and 5 undergraduate students pursuing medical studies. These are individuals who are known to the authority. One of the 5 undergraduate students, 3 should graduate in 2019, and the remaining 2 in 2020. Of the 13 postgraduate students, 2 are expected to complete their studies in 2018, 3 in 2019, 5 in 2020, and 3 in 2021. The ministry is not aware if any of the above-mentioned students are on scholarships. I would defer to the Ministry of Education for such information.
Elected member for Northside.
Just for clarity, when the minister says that 5 undergraduate students, is he talking about the pre-medical degree, or is he talking about an MBBS degree, Bachelor of Medicine and Surgery degree?
Honorable Minister.
Honorable member, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable member from Northside, I'll undertake to get this information for you. I requested for the technocrats to be here, and the seat is empty.
There were no other questions.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the elected member for Northside, to ask the Honourable Minister of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing, question number 11.
Honorable member from Northside.
Can the Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister of Health, can the minister state what, if any, improvements, including new ambulances, are planned to the ambulance service for the districts of Northside, East End, and Bordentown?
Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Health Services Authority continuously reviews the operations of all district health clinics to evaluate the need for capital investments in facilities, equipment, or new services based on our existing data showing, for example, utilization trends and population changes. As part of the vehicle replacement plan, all emergency medical services stations on Grand Cayman, and Cayman Brac will receive new units before the end of 2017. This includes the Eastern Districts having a new ambulance. Approval has also been given for the extension to the Northside Ambulance Bay through capital funding for the current financial year, as well as submissions made in the budget for an expansion of emergency medical services in the district of Bordentown.
There are no supplementaries.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the elected member from Northside, to ask the Honourable Minister of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing. Question number 12.
Honorable member from Northside.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, I wish to ask the Honourable Minister of Health, can the Minister state how much of the bad debt for the Health Services Authority has been written off up to June 30th, 2017?
Honorable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Health Services Authority has implemented several initiatives to reduce its receivables, and whilst there will continue to be some level of uncollectible revenue, the authority has made significant improvements in its bad debt expenses this year compared to previous years. The uncollectible debt was reduced by half as reflected in the chart below. 2013, the write-off was $4,010,851. The bad debt was $15,410,625. In 2014, the write-off was $3,608,314. The bad debt was $11,353,203. In 2015, the write-off was $2,302,332. The bad debt was $16,991,857. In 2016, the write-off was $3,513,807. The bad debt was $14,013,265. In 2017, the write-off was $15,076,25.32. And the bad debt was $7,753,689.53. For 2017, the authorities board approved the write-off of just over $15 million in unrecoverable debt, which had accumulated for more than a decade and now deemed uncollectible. This exercise was also a recommendation made by the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee last year. In addition, the authority is in the final stages of engaging a debt collection agency to help collect outstanding receivables. Mr. Speaker, the authority has made provisions this year for $7 million in uncollectible revenue, which is considerably lower than the provisions in previous years, as in within the healthcare and is within the healthcare industry ratios in the United States. However, the authority is working to achieve the industry standard set by the American College of Healthcare Executives, which is an international professional society of 40,000 healthcare executives who lead hospitals, healthcare systems, and other healthcare organizations, and recommends bad debt write-off as a percentage of gross revenues of 3.3%.
Minister, the member
Mr.
from Northside.
Mr. Chairman, as a matter of public record and accuracy, I invite the Minister of Health to withdraw the following sentence from this answer, because the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee does not make any recommendations. It is the committee that makes the recommendations. So without having to go through the process of standing orders, I would invite the minister to set the record straight and withdraw that statement from the answer. Please, Mr. Chairman.
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this exercise was also a recommendation by the Committee of the Public Accounts Committee last year. A correction of this good house.
Honorable Minister, we take it though that you have, by substituting that other one is withdrawn. So I think that should satisfy the member from the north side.
For
Honorable Minister,
For
to keep the peace.
the ease of hearts and the abundance of caution,
Yes.
I would like to withdraw the previous statement and superseded by the latter.
Thank you. There are no more supplementaries.
The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask the Honourable Minister of Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs. Question number 13.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Honourable Minister state how many Caymanians have moved from Cayman to live in another country within the past 10 years? B, how many Caymanians have moved to the UK since the past global recession in 2008? And C, is there any Caymanian migration data being collected by our government authorities? If so, what has been the data collected in the past 10 years? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will answer the question in the questions or the sub-questions contained in that one parliamentary question in the same order in which they have been posed. The data with respect to how many Caymanians have moved from Cayman to live in another country within the past 10 years is not being recorded and is therefore not available. How many Caymanians have moved to the UK since the past global recession 2008? This data is not being recorded and is therefore not available. Is there any Caymanian migration data being collected by government authorities? If so, what has been the data collected in the past 10 years? No government agencies collecting Cayman emigration. The Economics and Statistics Office attempted to capture Cayman immigration data during the 2010 census. However, the majority of the responses were don't know and not stated. Therefore, this data was not reported on.
The elected member for Georgetown Central, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just for formality purposes, can you indicate to me the process upon which do I stand up first, or do I just nod to indicate that I want to follow up questions?
You raise, you can, standing is the best form. However, you can grab the mic and if I catch your eye, then I will call on you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Honourable Minister say whether it's a priority to start the collection of this data of Caymanian, or of the potential Caymanian migration as there?
Honourable member, I've spoken to the member from East End before. I am not going to be abused either on the mic or by any whisper once I can hear it. I am not going. If you have threats, carry it out. Let me see. But I am not going to be abused, either on the mic or off. Continue, honorable member. Continue, honorable member from Georgetown Central.
Mr. Speaker, can I capture your attention, please, sir?
You have caught too much of that already. The member from Georgetown is on his feet.
Mr. Speaker, you are truncating me in my
The honorable member should
responsibilities
take
here.
his seat.
And I do not
The
appreciate
honorable
it,
member
nor
should take his seat.
this country appreciate
The
it.
honorable member should
You have
take
done it ever
his
since
seat.
we have been in here.
The honorable
and it
member,
needs to stop.
Sarge,
It's you who started it by whispering
under
me.
the standing orders, I am asking this member to stop. I will carry out the standing orders. And the member is testing me to do it. That's what he wants done. I give him another opportunity. Honorable member for Georgetown, carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Honorable Minister responsible for immigration indicate whether it's a priority for this administration to start collecting this type of data as to the value of the data collected?
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, this is not something that has been discussed since I have been the minister responsible for immigration, or indeed even during the previous term. It is an issue that I will raise as we're going through this process now of proposing amendments to the immigration law and more broadly looking at the whole issue of human resources in these islands. So it's something I will take on board.
There are no supplementaries.
The elected member for Newlands to ask Honourable Deputy Governor, ex officio member responsible for the portfolio of the Civil Service, question number 14.
The honorable member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask question number 14 in my name to an Honourable Deputy Governor, ex officio member. Can the Honourable Deputy Governor state whether all government vacancies are now being listed in the National Workforce Development Agency, NWDA jobs database?
The honorable Deputy Governor.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, by law, the Cayman Islands Civil Service is required to fill vacancies by way of open competition. In practice, government vacancies are notified through numerous channels, including online. Online, government vacancies are notified primarily through the dedicated jobs page at www.recruitment.gov.ky website. All externally advertised civil service jobs are listed on this site. Additionally, government vacancies are notified on the NWDA job portal, either through a full listing on the NWDA's job portal or, at a minimum, through a link to the www.recruitment.gov.ky website, which is embedded on the NWDA jobs portal. Finally, both websites, i.e. the main government recruitment site and the NWDA jobs portal, have links located on the www.eservices.gov.ky website under the header of Education and Employment. In terms of the NWDA jobs portal, the NWDA reports approximately 11 public sector agencies are registered to use the full listings on the NWDA's job portal, including 5 civil service entities. This number is gradually growing, and as recently as this summer, the NWDA provided training to civil service departments on how to register jobs. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, the purpose for which the NWDA's job portal was created is being tackled within the civil service. The civil service's commitment to hiring Caymanians is manifested in many ways. The most obvious manifestation is the fact that as of the 30th of June, 2016, the civil service is 74.3% Caymanian. When you exclude the 4 departments who hire the most non-Caymanians, specifically Education Department, the Police Department, Prison Department, and the Department of Children and Family Services, the percentage of Caymanians comprising our workforce is 87%, or nearly 9 out of every 10 employees. Coupled with this, the Cayman Islands government has numerous checks and balances in place to regulate our hiring practices. The civil service has a dedicated HR audit function, ensuring legal compliance, is subject to freedom of information, facilitating transparency, and employment decisions are subject to appeals to the Civil Service Appeals Commission, ensuring arm's length objectivity and fairness. Each year, the civil service employs more than 100 Caymanian interns and provide upward of 80 unpaid work attachments for SciFEX students, amongst other employment initiatives targeting qualified Caymanians. So, Mr. Speaker, yes, we are increasingly using the NWDA jobs portal, but even prior, our efforts to hire Caymanians has historically been manifested in diverse yet successful ways. We are seeking to strategically expand these hiring channels in 2018. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the acting Honorable Deputy Governor say whether or not this current administration, with the formulation of the new Human Resources Authority that is suggested by the Honorable Premier, has there been any indications to the acting Deputy Governor whether there would be a working partnership and what discussions or how that will play out in respect to? Because obviously we acknowledge that the Cayman Islands government is a very big employer here in the Cayman Islands, and one would assume that their role within this HR development would be very important. So maybe the Deputy Governor, Acting Deputy Governor, the Honorable Ms. Macfield can answer that. Thank you.
The Honorable the Acting Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank the member from Georgetown Central for that question. Mr. Speaker, the member has touched on a very important opportunity that has been identified by the portfolio of the Civil Service, as well as the ministry responsible for the new Department of Human Resources. This would give us an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to, as they are looking at what changes might be brought about in the amalgamation and restructuring of that department, to also factor in the employment needs of the civil service. We have already had initial discussions with the chief officer responsible, and we have agreed that as they are formulating their plans for the way forward, that we would be a part of that consultation, which is something that we very much welcome, as being able to increase our channels for reaching Caymanians, and doing so in a way that is also going to deliver on the outcomes that we have, because it takes into consideration what our particular challenges have been historically. We welcome the opportunity to get in from the ground up. Thank you.
Statements by honourable members and ministers of the Cabinet.
None.
Personal explanations.
None.
Obituary and other ceremonial speeches.
None.
Raising of matter privileges.
None.
Government business.
Before you enter on item 11, seems a good time to take the luncheon break, and we will take the break until 2:15. 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock.